Have you ever wondered how ancient civilizations shaped our world? Feeling restless while trying to sleep? In this video, we share captivating stories from ancient history. Each tale will transport you to a different time and place. You will explore mystical lands, powerful empires, and legendary heroes. Imagine drifting off to sleep while hearing about the pyramids of Egypt. Picture the ancient Greeks and their tales of gods and goddesses. Each story unfolds like a gentle whisper, inviting you to relax. As you listen, notice how history still impacts us today. The lessons and cultures may help you appreciate our modern world. So, get comfortable and let the soothing narrative guide you to sleep. Please share where you are watching from and what time it is. Connect with others who are journeying through history too. Now settle in, breathe deeply, and enjoy these ancient stories. Let the past cradle you into a peaceful sleep. In the vast sun-scorched deserts of modern-day Iraq, one of the world's first great civilizations was born. Here, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, Sumer bloomed. They gave us cities, laws, and the invention of writing. But among the tens of thousands of clay tablets they left behind, one set of documents stands apart, records so profound they challenge the very first chapter of the human story. They aren't just poems or myths, but official records. And they describe a time when kingship was handed down from heaven, and the first rulers were something else. In the early 1900s, a German-American archaeologist named Hermann Hilprecht was working at the ancient site of Nippur when he unearthed something extraordinary. It was a small, four-sided clay prism covered in the tight, wedge-shaped script of cuneiform. Today, it's known as the Weld-Blundell prism, the most complete copy of what we call the Sumerian king list. As scholars translated its ancient script, they uncovered a timeline that defied all logic. The list begins with a simple, chilling statement. After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. It then names its first kings, who ruled before a great flood swept the world, and gives their reigns in millennia. One king ruled for 28,800 years, another for 36,000. Mainstream history dismisses these figures as fantasy, but here's the problem. The very same document, without a break, goes on to list later kings whose reigns were plausible and whose existence is backed by other evidence. This authenticated artifact makes us ask a startling question. What if we're not reading a fairy tale, but a history book whose rules we've forgotten? Before we get lost in the impossible numbers, it helps to understand what this thing actually is. The Sumerian king list isn't just one tablet, but a collection of at least 18 different versions discovered across Mesopotamia, most dating to around 4,000 years ago. While they have their differences, they all seem to come from a single, shared, ideal history of their world. The most famous version, the Weld-Blundell prism, was designed to be rotated on a spindle, a kind of four-sided, readable column. It was, in effect, one of humanity's earliest history books, a systematic chronicle of power. The list was a powerful political document meant to legitimize the current king by showing he was the rightful heir to a continuous line of power stretching back to the beginning of time, a power granted directly from the gods. The Sumerians were meticulous record keepers. They developed writing not for poetry, but for accounting, to track grain, livestock, and taxes. They created a complex base 60 math system which we still use today to measure time and degrees in a circle. They charted the stars with startling accuracy. This wasn't a culture given to careless exaggeration, their records were their truth. So, when these same scribes created a document chronicling their history with bureaucratic precision, we have to consider they believed it was entirely factual. To them, the king list wasn't a collection of bedtime stories. It was a state-sanctioned historical record. And that record begins in an age so distant, it precedes all known human civilization. The king list is split into two distinct parts, before the flood and after. The first section is what makes this document so baffling. It begins in the city of Eridu, which the Sumerians considered the first city on Earth. Here, the first king, Alulim, took the throne. According to the scribes who etched his name into clay, he ruled for 28,800 years. His successor reigned for 36,000 years. The list names 8 kings across 5 cities who ruled for a combined total of 241,200 years. These aren't just random fantastical numbers, they're specific and calculated. They are based on the Sumerian numerical unit known as Asar, which represents 3,600 years. Alulim's reign was precisely 8 sars. To the Sumerians, these numbers were precise measurements of time, just on a scale we can't comprehend. This era is known as the antediluvian period, the time before the Great Flood. The world it describes is one where kingship was a divine gift, and the rulers themselves seem more than mortal. While the list doesn't call them gods, their lifespans certainly aren't those of men. The cities they supposedly governed, Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, have been identified by archaeologists, their foundations lying deep beneath the Iraqi sands. This grounds the narrative in a physical reality. These were real places. This part of the list presents a portrait of a mythological epic, an age of incredible stability ruled by a handful of sovereigns for nearly 250,000 years. It's a history that ended abruptly and violently. After detailing the 241,200-year reign of the first 8 kings, the Sumerian king list reaches its dramatic turning point. The text states, simply and ominously, "Then the flood swept over." This cataclysmic event serves as a hard reset for civilization. The 5 cities of the antediluvian kings were wiped away, and their impossibly long-reigning monarchs vanished. But the story doesn't end. The list continues. After the flood had swept over and the kingship had descended from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. This idea of a world-destroying flood isn't unique to the Sumerians. The story echoes in cultures all over the globe. The Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh tells a detailed story of a great flood sent by angry gods. And most famously, the biblical book of Genesis tells the story of Noah and his ark. But the connection between the king list and Genesis is startlingly specific. Both texts describe a pattern of extreme longevity before the flood and a sharp decrease in lifespans afterward. Just as the antediluvian kings ruled for tens of thousands of years, early figures in Genesis, like Methuselah, lived for many hundreds of years. After the flood, in both narratives, lifespans shrink dramatically. This shared pattern suggests something more than coincidence. It may point toward a common, ancient memory of a real catastrophe that left a deep mark on early humanity. The Sumerians weren't just telling a story, they were recording what they saw as a historical dividing line. Before the flood was one epic. After the flood was another, the beginning of the world as they knew it. It's in the post-flood section that the king list becomes truly mind-bending. After the flood, kingship is re-established in Kish. The new kings still have very long reigns. The first one, Jeshur, is said to have ruled for 1,200 years. But as the list progresses, the reigns get shorter and shorter, moving from thousands of years to hundreds, and eventually to completely plausible figures. And it's here that we find a name that seems to bridge the gap between myth and history: Gilgamesh. According to the king list, Gilgamesh was the 5th king of Uruk, ruling for 126 years. For a long time, Gilgamesh was thought to be a purely mythological hero. But while direct archaeological proof is missing, many scholars now believe he was a real historical king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, based on other inscriptions from the period that mention him. This is the central puzzle of the Sumerian king list. It's a single, continuous document that lists the seemingly mythical 28,800-year reign of Alulim in the same tone and format as the historical reign of Gilgamesh. To the scribes, it was all one unbroken history. If we accept that Gilgamesh was likely a real person, how can we so easily dismiss the kings who came before him on the very same list? The document doesn't allow for a neat separation of legend and reality. It suggests that the fantastic stories from the dawn of time and the documented history of later dynasties are part of the same singular story of humanity. The list itself is the bridge, daring us to cross it. So, what do we make of all this? How do we explain a historical document that records the seemingly impossible? The mainstream academic view is that the antediluvian rains are symbolic, not literal. The huge numbers, scholars argue, were a form of political propaganda to express immense power, divine favor, and ancient lineage. The numbers themselves, based on their base 60 math system, may have held a sacred meaning that is now lost to us. In this interpretation, the list is a tool of statecraft, designed to legitimize a king's rule by wrapping it in the grandeur of a mythical past. But that explanation doesn't satisfy everyone. It doesn't fully account for the sharp drop in lifespans after the flood, a pattern seen in other ancient traditions. And why would a culture so obsessed with accurate records suddenly indulge in such wild fantasy at the beginning of their most important historical document? This leads to more speculative theories. Some wonder if the years were different, perhaps shorter time periods. Others point to the so-called Sumerian problem, the fact that Sumerian civilization appears in Mesopotamia with incredible sophistication. However, this is misleading, as archaeological evidence shows a gradual development from earlier local cultures like the Ubaid and Uruk periods. One of the most radical ideas is that the list means exactly what it says, that the antediluvian kings were rulers from a long-lost civilization destroyed by the flood. The Sumerian king list sits at the crossroads of myth and history, a 4,000-year-old puzzle etched in clay. It is both a meticulously kept record and a chronicle of the impossible. Was it a piece of sophisticated political symbolism, a misunderstood calculation, or a literal memory of a lost age? The truth is, we don't know. But the existence of this artifact, blending verifiable people with unbelievable legends, challenges what we think we know about our past. It suggests the story of civilization may be far older and stranger than we've imagined. It's a quiet whisper from the dawn of time, reminding us that some histories aren't buried, but are just waiting to be remembered. What do you believe? Do these ancient records point to a forgotten chapter of our history? Or are they the powerful poetry of a civilization trying to make sense of its own origins? Let us know your theory in the comments below. Imagine you wake up, but not in your bed. The air is thick with dust, the sun is a brutal rising inferno, and your muscles already ache with a fatigue you've never known. This isn't a nightmare, it's around 2570 BCE, and you're a pyramid builder. Forget what you've seen in movies. You won't be whipped by a cruel master, but the truth is far harsher. Today, you'll haul limestone blocks weighing more than a car with nothing but ropes and raw strength. You'll be paid in bread and beer, but every moment is a battle against injury, disease, and sheer exhaustion. Think you have what it takes? Let's be honest. The evidence suggests you wouldn't even last 24 hours. The first thing you notice is the cold. Not the biting cold of winter, but the deceptive pre-dawn chill of the desert. It seeps through the thin walls of your dwelling and settles deep in your bones, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat that will soon dominate your world. You aren't sleeping on a soft mattress, but a reed mat laid over a hard-packed earth floor. Every muscle, every joint, every fiber of your being screams in protest. The aches from yesterday's labor haven't faded. They've merely settled into a permanent, grinding reality. You're not in a private home, but a sprawling state-sponsored settlement, a place archaeologists today call Hayt el Ghurab, the lost city of the pyramid builders. If you're a temporary laborer, Perhaps a farmer serving your civic duty while the Nile floods your fields. You're housed in long communal barracks. These massive galleries could hold hundreds of men at a time, packed together in a symphony of coughs, snores, and restless stirring. The air is dense with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale beer, and the ever-present dust. Privacy is a concept that doesn't exist here. Your life is a communal existence, defined by the rhythm of the pharaoh's grand project. If you're a skilled, permanent worker, a stone carver, or a master craftsman, your situation is slightly better. You might live with your family in a small, mud brick house, likely consisting of a public area, a private living space, and a rear section for cooking. But even this relative comfort is basic, crowded, and dirty. The village is a marvel of logistics, a bustling city with its own bakeries, breweries, kitchens, and even rudimentary hospitals, all separated from the sacred pyramid site by a massive stone boundary known as the Wall of the Crow. But this logistical masterpiece offers little personal comfort. As you rise in the near darkness, there's no time for reflection. Around you, thousands of other men are doing the same, a silent army stirring to life. You pull on a simple linen loincloth, the standard uniform for the grueling day ahead. There's no gentle start, no morning coffee. There is only the immediate crushing knowledge of the day's task. Your body is already a landscape of pain. Skeletal remains found in the workers' cemetery show a population plagued by degenerative arthritis, especially in the vertebrae and knees. Your spine is likely already showing signs of damage from the constant heavy lifting. You might be in your 30s, but your body feels ancient. This is your reality, and the sun hasn't even risen yet. Your first 24 hours have just begun, and you're already running on empty. Your first meal of the day isn't about pleasure, it's about survival. You file out of your dwelling and head towards the communal dining halls or bakeries, where the air is thick with the smell of yeast and heat. Your breakfast is handed to you. Coarse, dense bread, a handful of figs or dates, and perhaps a raw onion. And to wash it all down, a jug of beer. For a modern palate, the idea of beer for breakfast is jarring, but this isn't the light filtered beverage you know. Ancient Egyptian beer was thick, nutritious, and soupy, more like a fermented liquid bread than a drink. It was a foundational source of calories, hydration, and morale. As a laborer, you get a generous ration, probably several liters throughout the day. This liquid sustenance is your wage, your energy drink, and your anesthetic all in one. The bread is made from emmer wheat, a tough, ancient grain. The flour is coarse, ground with stone, which means fine particles of sand and rock are inevitably mixed in. Archaeological analysis of workers' teeth shows extreme wear, with some ground down to the gums by the time they reach their 40s. Every bite is a gritty, abrasive effort that slowly grinds away your enamel. This meal is a calculated energy deposit. The dates and figs provide a quick sugar rush, while the dense bread and beer offer the slow-release carbohydrates essential for the monumental physical exertion to come. To function, modern estimates suggest you'd need an immense caloric intake, maybe upwards of 4,000 kilocalories per day. As you eat, you're surrounded by the organized chaos of the largest construction project on Earth. This village is a logistical powerhouse. Archaeologists estimate that to feed the workforce, a staggering amount of food was required. Daily deliveries may have included dozens of cattle and scores of sheep to the workers' village. Vast herds were raised specifically for this purpose, and thousands of kilograms of grain were brought in and stored in massive silos. But this bounty wasn't shared equally. A clear food hierarchy existed. If you're a high-ranking overseer, you get the best cuts of beef. As a common laborer, your protein will more likely come from sheep, goat, and vast quantities of fish from the Nile. You finish your gritty bread and drain your jug of thick beer. There's a brief moment of camaraderie, a shared understanding of the ordeal ahead. Graffiti left by work gangs with names like the Drunkards of Menkora and Friends of Khufu speaks to this sense of group identity, a flicker of humanity amid the toil. But the moment is fleeting. The sky is lightening in the east. It's time to head to the plateau. The stones are waiting. As dawn breaks over the horizon, you join a river of thousands of men flowing from the village toward the Giza Plateau. The Great Pyramid, still cloaked in shadow, looms before you, a man-made mountain of ambition. The sight is both awe-inspiring and deeply intimidating. For over a decade, this has been your life's work, a sacred duty to ensure your pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. This belief is a powerful motivator, the ideological engine driving the entire operation. This isn't just a job, it's a national religious project, a way to build a future for Egypt and ensure your own place in the cosmos. Your destination is the quarry, a gaping wound in the earth just south of the great structure. This is where the lifeblood of the pyramid is sourced, vast quantities of limestone. The air here is already a haze of fine white dust that coats your throat and stings your eyes. The noise is a deafening symphony of industry, the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of dolerite pounders, the sharp clink of copper chisels against stone, and the constant shouting of overseers directing the chaos. Forget steel. Your tools are primitive but effective. You wield heavy, rounded pounders made of dolerite, a stone harder than granite, to smash and break the rock. For finer work, you have chisels and saws made of copper. This presents your first impossible challenge. Copper is a relatively soft metal. On its own, it's not hard enough to efficiently cut limestone, let alone the granite used for burial chambers. So, you use an abrasive, quartz sand, to aid the cutting process. You and your team saw back and forth, dragging the copper blade through a slurry of sand and water, slowly, painstakingly grinding your way through the rock. It's an agonizingly slow process. It could take a skilled team hours to cut just one block. Once a rough block is cut, it needs to be shaped. Using more chisels and stone hammers, you and your fellow workers refine the block, ensuring its dimensions are correct. Precision is key. The outer casing stones of the pyramid would eventually be fitted so perfectly that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. While the core blocks you're working on are rougher, they still have to fit within the grand design. Scribes are everywhere, their reed pens scratching on papyrus, keeping meticulous records of every block, every worker, and every ration. This entire operation is a masterclass in project management, with the workforce divided into crews, gangs, and divisions, each with a specific task. The physical toll of this work is immediate and brutal. Your hands are raw and blistered from the rough tools. The constant vibration from hammering travels up your arms, jarring your shoulders and back. Inhaling the fine limestone dust day after day will inevitably lead to respiratory problems. You are breathing in your own slow decline. The morning has barely begun, and you're already engaged in one of the most physically destructive jobs in human history. The block is finally free. A limestone behemoth weighing roughly 2.5 tons, the equivalent of a modern SUV. Now comes the part of your day that defies modern comprehension, moving it. There are no wheels, no engines, no cranes. There is only wood, rope, and the raw, coordinated power of human muscle. Your team, a division of perhaps 20 men, gathers around the stone. The block is painstakingly maneuvered onto a large wooden sled. You and the others take your positions, grabbing hold of thick ropes braided from papyrus reeds. The foreman shouts a command, a rhythmic chant begins, and you all lean into the ropes, your muscles screaming in unison. The initial inertia is the worst part. Every sinew in your body strains against the dead weight of the stone. Your bare feet dig into the sand for purchase. The rope, coarse and unforgiving, cuts into your hands and shoulders. Slowly, agonizingly, the sled begins to move, scraping across the desert floor. To make this impossible task slightly less impossible, another team of workers moves ahead of the sled, pouring water onto the sand. This simple trick, depicted in ancient artwork, reduces friction dramatically, allowing the sled to glide more easily. But easily is a relative term. You are still part of a human engine, burning through calories and sweat at an alarming rate. The desert sun is climbing higher, becoming a merciless force. Temperatures can soar, and there is no shade. The glare reflecting off the white limestone is blinding. Dehydration is a constant, deadly threat. The beer and water you consume are essential, but it's a constant battle to stay hydrated. Early signs of heat stroke, confusion, dizziness, a throbbing headache would have been a common and often fatal experience. Your work gang is a crucial unit of survival. You pull together, chant together, and survive together. One person stumbling could spell disaster, causing the sled to veer off course or, worse, slip backward, crushing anyone behind it. The physical strain is unimaginable. Skeletal evidence shows that pyramid builders frequently suffered from crushed limbs and spinal fractures. The sheer compressive force on your spine from years of this labor would lead to bent spines and chronic, debilitating pain. You haul the stone from the quarry to the base of the pyramid. The journey is a grueling marathon of pain and endurance. By the time you arrive, your loincloth is soaked through with sweat. Your muscles are trembling uncontrollably, and your throat is a raw, dusty passage. And this is just one block. On an average day, hundreds of stones were put into place. Your job is to do this again and again and again until the midday sun becomes too brutal to bear. Around mid-morning, as the sun reaches its most malevolent peak, the heat becomes a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that makes every breath feel like you're inhaling fire. Finally, the overseers call for a break, a desperate, strategic retreat from the sun's onslaught. You and your fellow workers scramble for any patch of shade you can find, the shadow of a half-finished wall, a temporary wooden structure, or the colossal pyramid itself. The relief from the direct sunlight is immediate but incomplete. The heat radiates from the stones and the sand, creating an oven-like environment. Your midday meal is brought out. It's simple and practical: more bread, and likely some salted fish caught from the Nile. The fish provides a vital source of protein to repair the muscle tissue you've been systematically destroying all morning. You also get another ration of beer, the thick caloric liquid helping to replenish your spent energy reserves and rehydrate your body. This break is a crucial moment for medical attention. Evidence from the workers' cemeteries shows that they received a surprising level of medical care for the time. Doctors were on site. We know this because skeletons have been found with expertly set fractures and even amputated limbs that had healed over. One skeleton belonged to a man whose leg was amputated, likely after being crushed by a stone. Analysis showed he lived for many years after the operation. If you twisted an ankle or broke a finger, there was a system in place to patch you up. Wounds might be treated with a mixture of honey and resin, which had antiseptic properties. But this care had its limits. Without knowledge of germ theory or antibiotics, infection was a major killer. A simple cut could easily become septic. Parasites from the Nile's water, like schistosomiasis, and other diseases like tuberculosis were also rampant. So you sit in the shade, eating your fish and bread, perhaps tending to a wound. You see a man with his arm in a splint made of wood and linen. You hear the groans of others whose bodies are simply giving out. The life of a laborer was harsh, and many died in their 30s or 40s. The medical care might keep you working, but it was a system designed for maintenance, not comfort. The break is a brief reprieve, just long enough for the worst of the midday heat to pass and for you to gather the strength for the second half of the day. But the rest is never enough. The exhaustion is too deep. As the call comes to return to work, you rise slowly, your body protesting every movement. The hardest part of the day is yet to come. The afternoon is defined by one single, terrifying objective: going up. Your block of stone now has to defy gravity. It needs to be hauled up the side of the pyramid itself. To achieve this, the Egyptians constructed massive ramps. The exact design is still debated. They could have been long and straight, wrapped around the pyramid in a spiral, or a combination of methods, possibly even including an internal ramp. Recent discoveries suggest systems of very steep ramps were used, flanked by staircases and wooden posts that gave the pullers extra leverage. Regardless of the design, the principle was the same. You are now pulling your 2.5-ton block not on flat ground, but up a steep, narrow incline. The effort required is exponentially greater. Your work gang reforms, ropes are refastened, and the chant begins anew. This time, it's a desperate, guttural sound of pure exertion. Every step up the ramp is a battle. Your leg muscles burn with lactic acid. Your back feels as though it might snap under the strain. The packed earth and rubble of the ramp is treacherous footing. A misplaced step and the sled could slip, a death sentence for anyone below. The scene is one of organized chaos, with hundreds of men hauling, pushing, and levering multi-ton stones up a massive slope. Once you reach the correct level, the block isn't just dropped into place. It's handed off to a specialized team of stone setters. Using a series of complex levers and immense precision, they would pivot, push, and guide the massive block into its final resting place. Gaps between the core stones were filled with gypsum mortar and rubble. Accidents were an accepted part of the process. A falling tool, a piece of debris, or a shifting stone could cause a fatal injury in an instant. Falls from the ramps were likely a common cause of death. You work with the constant, gnawing fear of a sudden, violent end. The work is relentless. For hours, you haul block after block up the ramp. There are no breaks now. The overseers push you harder, their voices sharp, racing against the setting sun. The pyramid must rise. The quota must be met. The pharaoh's eternal home must be completed. By the time the workday finally ends, you are a shell of a human being. Your energy reserves are completely depleted. Your body is a symphony of pain. Every joint aches. Every muscle is shredded. You are caked in a mixture of sweat, dust, and grime. As the sun dips towards the horizon, painting the pyramid in gold, you don't see its majesty. You only see a monument built on the foundation of your own broken body. The journey back to the village is a slow, shuffling procession of exhausted men. The conversations are muted, the camaraderie of the morning replaced by a shared, silent depletion. You arrive home as darkness gathers. If you have a family, they greet you, and you sit down for the final meal of the day. This is the most substantial meal, rich in protein to help your body attempt the impossible task of repairing itself overnight. You might have roasted mutton or goat, with lentils and onions. After eating, there is little energy for anything else. Some men might play a game of senet, an ancient board game, or share stories. An oil lamp might cast a flickering glow over your small home. But for you, there is only one pressing need: sleep. You collapse onto your reed mat, the same hard surface you woke up on what feels like a lifetime ago. Sleep doesn't come as a gentle release, but as a heavy, dreamless oblivion. And in your sleep, you may still feel the phantom strain of the ropes, the weight of the stone. Because you know, with absolute certainty, that in just a few short hours, you will have to wake up and do it all over again. So, could you last 24 hours as a pyramid builder? The evidence is clear. The brutal physical labor, the searing heat, and the constant risk of injury and disease would break most modern people within hours. Your body isn't conditioned for it. Your mind isn't prepared for it. The pyramid builders were not slaves, but they were skilled and organized laborers engaged in one of the most arduous undertakings in human history. They were incredibly resilient people who built eternity for their kings at the cost of their own bodies. The Great Pyramids are not just a testament to architectural genius. They are a silent, towering memorial to the thousands of forgotten workers whose strength and sacrifice raised them from the desert sands. What part of this daily ordeal do you think would be the hardest to endure? Let us know in the comments below. She's one of the most famous women in history, a name that brings to mind beauty, seduction, and tragic love. For 2,000 years, her story has been told and retold, slapped on canvases, and blasted across movie screens. She's the iconic queen of the Nile, the femme fatale who brought powerful men to their knees, whose romantic heart supposedly cost her an entire kingdom. But what if I told you that image is a lie? A brilliant piece of political propaganda that has held up for 2,000 years. The real Cleopatra wasn't the tragic beauty she's been sold as. Her power wasn't in her looks, and her love life wasn't a romance. It was a weapon. The story you know is fiction, written by her enemies to erase the truth, that she was one of the most brilliant political minds of her time, a multilingual genius who outmaneuvered the greatest empire on Earth for over 20 years. Today, we're dismantling the myths to find the real story of a political mastermind whose legacy was deliberately rewritten. We're going to expose the lies one by one, and in their place, build a picture of the real Cleopatra. And if you're ready to uncover the truth behind history's greatest lies, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell, because we're just getting started. Let's kick things off with the most basic lie. When you picture Cleopatra, you probably picture an Egyptian. It makes sense, right? She was the queen of Egypt after all. But this is where the story first goes wrong. Cleopatra wasn't ethnically Egyptian, not even a little. She was Greek. Specifically, Macedonian Greek, a direct descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's most trusted generals. When Alexander died, his commanders carved up his massive empire, and Ptolemy snagged the richest prize of all, Egypt. He founded a dynasty that would rule for nearly 300 years. And for all that time, the Ptolemies remained stubbornly Greek. They set up shop in the gleaming capital of Alexandria, a Hellenistic hub of culture and scholarship dropped onto the African coast. They spoke Greek, they practiced Greek customs, and they ruled Egypt like foreigners. In fact, for almost 3 centuries, not a single Ptolemaic ruler even bothered to learn the language of the people they governed. Until Cleopatra. This is our first real glimpse of her political genius. Cleopatra was the first and only ruler in her family to actually learn to speak Egyptian. And she didn't stop there. The ancient historian Plutarch tells us she was a polyglot, fluent in a whole host of languages that may have included Parthian, Hebrew, and Ethiopian. This wasn't just a hobby, it was a strategic weapon. By speaking their language, she could connect directly with her subjects, bypassing translators and earning a level of respect none of her ancestors ever managed. She embraced Egyptian religious traditions, presenting herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis. It was masterful political branding. She knew that to rule Egypt, she had to be seen not as a Greek outsider, but as a true pharaoh. So while her roots were purely Macedonian Greek, her decision to embrace Egyptian culture shows she was a totally different kind of ruler, one who saw power not just in who your ancestors were, but in strategy and connection. All right, This is the big one. The myth that has defined her for centuries. Cleopatra, the irresistible siren of the Nile whose beauty could launch fleets and topple empires. It's a story hammered into our heads by Shakespeare, Elizabeth Taylor, and countless paintings of a flawless goddess. And at the heart of it all is one famous story, the carpet. As the legend goes, a young Cleopatra, exiled by her little brother, needed to get to the Roman general Julius Caesar. Blocked by her brother's army, she had herself audaciously smuggled into the palace, rolled up inside a carpet, and presented as a gift to the 52-year-old Roman. In this version, she's unrolled, stunning and vulnerable, and Caesar is instantly smitten. It's a fantastic story, but it frames the entire event as an act of seduction. The reality was so much more impressive. This wasn't a pretty girl meeting a powerful man. This was a calculated piece of political theater by a desperate but brilliant operator. Think about the sheer guts it took. At her most vulnerable moment, she didn't beg from afar. She bypassed every guard and political rival to place herself, uninvited, directly in a potential ally's private chambers. It was a shocking power move, meant to show Caesar she wasn't some pawn, but a player. And what about that beauty that supposedly sealed the deal? The historical evidence for it is thin. In fact, the evidence we do have points the other way. Roman coins minted during her reign, which she personally approved, show a woman with a prominent, hooked nose, a sloping forehead, and a strong jaw. This was not the face of Elizabeth Taylor. It was the face of a ruler, projecting strength and intelligence. Plutarch, our best source, flat out says her beauty was not altogether incomparable, nor such as to strike those who saw her. Instead, he said her real power was her irresistible charm, her wit, and the mesmerizing quality of her voice. Her real weapon of seduction was her brain. So when she met Caesar, she wasn't armed with her looks, she was armed with her mind. She could talk to him in his own language, debate politics and military strategy as an equal. He was a brilliant man, and he saw a brilliant mind in her. She was offering him not a night of passion, but a kingdom, the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean, whose resources he desperately needed to fund his civil war. Her seduction was a sales pitch, delivered by a CEO, not a damsel in distress. The myth of her beauty is maybe the most insulting lie of all, because it turns a political force of nature into just a pretty face. The myth of Cleopatra the seductress flows right into the next great lie, Cleopatra, the tragic romantic. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony have been sold as two of history's greatest love stories. Epic, sweeping passions that led to her downfall, a woman who loved so hard she lost everything. But calling them love stories completely misses the point. These weren't love affairs. They were political and military alliances, calculated with the cold precision of a grand chess master. Let's look at Caesar. When they met, she was fighting for her throne and her life. Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was her ticket to winning, and for Caesar, Cleopatra was the key to Egypt's unbelievable wealth. It was a partnership of pure self-interest. She needed his army, he needed her money. It was that simple. Their union produced a son, Caesarion, or Little Caesar. For Cleopatra, this was the ultimate political prize, an heir with the blood of Caesar, her claim to a future that could unite Rome and Egypt. But when Caesar was assassinated on the Ides of March, her plans and her protection crumbled. She wasn't just a heartbroken lover, she was a political leader whose main ally had just been murdered, leaving her and her kingdom dangerously exposed. So, she did what any smart strategist would do. She found a new ally. Enter Mark Antony. After Caesar's death, the Roman world was split between his heir, Octavian, in the west, and the powerful general Mark Antony in the east. For Cleopatra, teaming up with Antony was a geopolitical necessity. He was her shield against a hostile Rome, and she was his bank, funding his military ambitions. Their partnership is remembered for its decadence, wild parties, and romantic cruises on the Nile. But under the surface, every move was political. The climax was the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. Antony held a bizarre military triumph in Alexandria, not Rome. Enthroned next to Cleopatra, who was dressed as the goddess Isis, he declared her queen of kings and her children the rulers of huge territories, much of which belonged to Rome. To us, this might sound romantic. To the Roman Senate, it was treason. This was Antony declaring a new Eastern Empire with Alexandria as its capital, ruled by a Roman general and a foreign queen. It was the single greatest gift of propaganda he could have possibly handed his rival, Octavian. And that brings us to the source of nearly every lie we know about Cleopatra. To understand why her story is so twisted, you have to understand Octavian. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, was locked in a brutal power struggle with Mark Antony, but starting another civil war against a popular Roman general was a tough sell. The Roman people were sick of war, so Octavian, a master of propaganda, did something brilliant. He didn't declare war on Antony, he declared war on Cleopatra. He launched one of the most successful smear campaigns in history. He painted her not as a ruler, but as a wicked foreign sorceress who used sex and magic to bewitch a noble Roman and turn him against his home. Roman poets and historians, bankrolled by Octavian, wrote scathing accounts of her as a drunken, power-mad harlot who dreamed of destroying Rome. This narrative did two things. First, it turned a messy civil war into a noble defense of Roman values against a foreign temptress. It made Antony look weak and un-Roman, a puppet controlled by an evil queen. Second, it created a story so scandalous and dramatic that it has survived for 2 millennia, completely overriding the truth. The donations of Alexandria were the centerpiece of his campaign. Octavian spun it as proof that Antony was going to move the capital to Egypt and rule with his foreign mistress. He illegally seized Antony's will and read it aloud to the Senate, revealing Antony's wish to be buried in Alexandria with Cleopatra, which was the final nail in the coffin. The image we have of Cleopatra, the seductress, the party queen, is not a historical portrait. It is a political caricature drawn by her greatest enemy to justify a war and legitimize his own rise to power. He won the propaganda war so completely that after he defeated them and became the first Roman emperor, Augustus, his version of the story simply became history. The final myth is the story of her death. It's the perfect tragic ending to the romance novel version of her life. Devastated after hearing Antony is dead, Cleopatra presses a poisonous snake, an asp, to her breast, choosing to die for love. It's the ultimate romantic tragedy. But, like everything else, the truth is about politics, not passion. After their final defeat at the Battle of Actium, Cleopatra knew it was over. Antony did take his own life, falling on his sword, but Cleopatra's end was far more calculated. The greatest humiliation for a captured enemy was to be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains during a military triumph, a living trophy of Rome's victory. For Cleopatra, the proud descendant of Alexander the Great and the living goddess Isis, that fate was worse than death. Her suicide was not an act of romantic despair. It was her final act of defiance, a political statement. She was denying Octavian his ultimate prize and taking control of the only thing she had left, her own story. But what about the snake? The story of the asp, hidden in a basket of figs, is famous, but even ancient historians were skeptical. Plutarch mentions it, but he also offers other theories. Many modern experts find it unlikely. A cobra is large, beige, hard to hide, and its bite isn't always fatal, often leading to a slow, ugly death, hardly the quick, dignified end a planner like Cleopatra would want. A more likely scenario, which Plutarch also brings up, is that she used a fast-acting poison, maybe a potent cocktail of toxins she administered with something sharp like a hairpin. She was known to be an expert in poisons and had supposedly experimented to find the most painless method. The Ass P story, though, was just better PR. The snake was a symbol of Egyptian royalty and divinity. It made for a much better story for Octavian, who even had a statue of her with an asp on her arm in his victory parade to really sell the narrative. Her death, like her life, was twisted by her enemies to fit their story. It wasn't the last chapter of a romance. It was the last move of a queen making sure she left the world stage on her own terms. So, who was Cleopatra? She wasn't an Egyptian, but a Greek queen who was smart enough to become one in the eyes of her people. She wasn't a supermodel, but a charismatic leader whose mind was her greatest asset. Her relationships weren't love stories, but expertly crafted political alliances. And her death wasn't a surrender to heartbreak, but a final, defiant act of political will. The woman we call Cleopatra is a fiction, a ghost created by Roman propaganda. The real Cleopatra was a ruler of formidable intellect, a ruthless political operator, a skilled economist, and a military commander who, for over 20 years, held off the most powerful empire in the world. Her true legacy isn't one of a broken heart, but of a brilliant mind. She wasn't a victim of love. She was a casualty of war, defeated by the unstoppable might of Rome, and then buried under an avalanche of lies. Perhaps the greatest lie of all is that we've been hearing her story for 1,000 years, when in reality, it was silenced. What do you think is the biggest lie about Cleopatra's story? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching. The story of civilization we all learned in school seems pretty straightforward, right? First, we learned to farm. Then, we built villages. Those villages grew into cities, and from there, it was a straight shot to complex society, government, art, and religion. For decades, this was the accepted, linear story of humanity. But what if that entire timeline is wrong? What if, deep in the shadows of prehistory, thousands of years before anyone planted a seed, a lost civilization did the impossible? They gathered, organized, and built a temple of stunning sophistication, a monument that predates Stonehenge by over 6,000 years. And then, after centuries of use, they deliberately buried their entire world and simply vanished. This is the story of Göbekli Tepe, the people who weren't supposed to exist, and the profound mystery of why they chose to disappear. Our story begins not with a king or an empire, but on a dusty, rounded hilltop in southeastern Turkey. For generations, local shepherds knew this place as Göbekli Tepe, or Potbelly Hill. They saw it as little more than a strange, lonely mound dotted with carved limestone, believing the hill was sacred, but they had no idea what was sleeping just inches beneath the soil. It wasn't until 1994 that a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt, acting on a brief mention in an old survey, decided to take a closer look. He recognized flint shards on the surface not as natural rocks, but as the tools of Stone Age people. When he started digging, he uncovered the top of a massive T-shaped pillar, exquisitely carved and unmistakably man-made. In that moment, the entire story of human history began to fracture. What Schmidt's team unearthed was not a village, but a sprawling complex of monumental stone circles. Radiocarbon dating placed its construction at an astonishing 9600 BCE. To put that in perspective, This was a time before pottery, before writing, before the wheel. The Great Pyramid of Giza was still 7,000 years in the future. This was the Stone Age, a period we associate with small, nomadic bands of hunter-gatherers. And yet, here was proof of something else entirely. Here was evidence of a coordinated effort, of shared belief, and an artistic vision on a scale that should have been impossible. The site, often called the zero point of history, immediately posed a revolutionary question. If hunter-gatherers built this, what else did we have wrong about our past? It challenged the core assumption that complex society was a consequence of agriculture. Göbekli Tepe suggested the opposite. Perhaps it was the need to gather, to worship, and to build something monumental together that actually drove humanity toward civilization. The temple came first, everything else followed. Walking through Göbekli Tepe is like stepping into another world, one governed by forgotten symbols and ancient, silent gods. The site is made up of at least 20 enclosures, though only a fraction have been excavated. The largest are huge circular structures, some reaching 20 meters across. At their heart are two colossal T-shaped pillars, towering up to 5.5 meters tall and weighing as much as 20 tons. These are surrounded by smaller, inward-facing pillars connected by stone walls. But these aren't just crude blocks. They're masterpieces of prehistoric art. The T-shaped pillars are stylized human figures. We know this because many have arms carved along their sides, with hands pointing toward loincloths etched at their fronts. Their T-shaped tops are thought to be abstract heads, left deliberately blank, creating an eerie, anonymous presence. Were they revered ancestors, or the first gods ever given form? The pillar surfaces teem with life, a Stone Age menagerie carved with reliefs of foxes, boars, spiders, scorpions, and graceful cranes. Vultures feature prominently, perhaps linked to funeral rites, as some cultures believe they carried the souls of the dead into the afterlife. This isn't just random decoration, it's a complex symbolic language we're only just beginning to understand. Some researchers think it tells a story, a mythology carved in stone. The skill required is mind-boggling. The pillars were quarried from the surrounding limestone bedrock, sometimes hundreds of meters away, using nothing but flint tools. They were then shaped, carved, and hauled to the summit before being lifted into place. Archaeologists estimate that a single enclosure required the coordinated labor of hundreds of people from multiple clans, a level of social organization unheard of for hunter-gatherers. They would gather for massive ritual feasts. Tens of thousands of butchered animal bones, mostly wild gazelle, have been found on site. And the discoveries keep coming. Ground-penetrating radar shows that over 90% of Göbekli Tepe is still buried. In 2023, archaeologists unearthed a stunningly realistic human statue and a painted boar, adding another layer to the artistic traditions of these people. Other research suggests the complex was built on a sophisticated geometric plan, with three main enclosures forming a near-perfect equilateral triangle. The builders may have even been keen astronomers. One theory proposes that carvings on the vulture stone pillar represent constellations and record a cataclysmic impact that occurred around the end of the last ice age. So, who were they? Who were the architects of this Stone Age cathedral? For a long time, the leading theory, championed by Klaus Schmidt, was that Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center built by nomadic hunter-gatherers who traveled to the site before dispersing again. There was little evidence of permanent settlement, no houses or daily trash pits. This was revolutionary in itself, proving that nomads could achieve incredible feats of engineering and cooperation. But the picture is becoming more complex. More recent discoveries are challenging the idea that the site was purely ceremonial. Archaeologists are uncovering evidence of year-round occupation and tools for daily life, suggesting people lived there at least part of the year to construct the monuments and perform rituals. This society seems to have been in transition, on the very cusp of the agricultural revolution. They were hunter-gatherers, starting to experiment with the wild grains that grew abundantly in this region of the Fertile Crescent. Instead of agriculture leading to complex society, Göbekli Tepe may have been the engine that drove the change. The immense logistical challenge of feeding hundreds of workers for construction and rituals may have been the very thing that spurred the intensive cultivation, and eventually, domestication of wheat. The temple created the need for the farm. This society was far from simple. Building these enclosures implies a social hierarchy. There must have been leaders, perhaps powerful shamans or clan elders, who could command labor and manage resources, likely holding power through control over sacred knowledge. Evidence of a so-called skull cult has even emerged, with fragments of human skulls found intentionally carved and modified after death, suggesting complex beliefs about ancestors and the spirit world. The art provides another clue. The animals depicted are almost all wild and dangerous: snakes, boars, and predators. This is a stark contrast to later Neolithic art, which often featured domesticated animals and symbols of fertility. Some scholars believe Göbekli Tepe represents the last great stand of the hunter-gatherer worldview. It may have been an attempt to capture the power and spirit of the animal world they had depended on for millennia, a world that was just beginning to vanish. The story of Göbekli Tepe is a powerful reminder that our past is not a closed book. With every excavation, new discoveries force us to rethink what we know about the dawn of civilization. If this journey into a 12,000-year-old mystery has captured your imagination, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. We're always exploring the edges of the known world, and you won't want to miss where we go next. Perhaps the deepest mystery of Göbekli Tepe isn't how it was built, but how it ended. Around 8000 BCE, after more than 1500 years of use, the people who had poured generations of effort into this site did something utterly inexplicable. They buried it. This was no simple abandonment. The enclosures were intentionally and meticulously filled in. The fill consisted of millions of limestone fragments, stone tools, and animal bones, all brought to the hilltop and packed into the structures until they were completely submerged. This act of burial is what preserved Göbekli Tepe so perfectly for millennia, creating a time capsule of the Stone Age. But why? Why would a society bury its own crowning achievement? For a long time, the consensus was a deliberate ritual burial. Perhaps a sacred site that had lost its power needed to be ritually closed, or desanctified. Another theory is that a new religion emerged, and the monuments of the old faith had to be hidden. Or maybe it was a final poignant act of preservation, burying the temple to protect it. However, even this long-standing theory is now being debated. More recent analysis, led by the site's current excavation director, Lee Clare, suggests the process was more complicated. He proposes the burial may have begun with natural landslides on the unstable slope. The builders may have constructed retaining walls, but were fighting a losing battle. The final burial, then, might have been a controlled, ritualized closure of a site that could no longer be maintained. Yet this doesn't fully erase the element of intent. Evidence from similar nearby sites shows that intentional burial was a common practice in this culture. Whether it was a purely ritual act or a response to environmental pressures, the decision to entomb Göbekli Tepe was a deliberate choice to mark the end of an era. For reasons we may never fully know, The people who defined themselves by this sacred hill chose to walk away and let it sleep. After burying their world, the people of Göbekli Tepe seemed to fade into the next chapter of human history. They didn't disappear in a cataclysm. Rather, they became the ancestors of the first farmers, the pioneers of the Neolithic Revolution, and they may have helped start it. They traded their sacred hill for settled villages, their hunter's spear for a farmer's sickle. Their monumental, centralized religion seems to have dissolved, replaced by more local, domestic beliefs. Göbekli Tepe is more than just the world's oldest temple. It's a ghost from a forgotten age, a testament to a time when human ingenuity was far more advanced than we ever believed possible. It proves that the path to civilization wasn't a straight line, but a complex, winding road filled with revolutionary ideas and false starts. Only a tiny fraction of the site has been uncovered. Beneath the soil, more stone circles and countless artifacts await, holding the answers to the questions that still haunt us. Who were these people really? What stories are told in their silent stone language? And what was the ultimate reason for their great vanishing act? Göbekli Tepe stands as a monument to the vastness of our own history and the humbling reality that entire chapters of our story are still waiting to be read. It reminds us that 12,000 years ago, on a lonely hilltop, a lost civilization chose to bury its world, leaving us with a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about where we come from. The year is 1147. Outside these walls, the world is a storm of chaos and war. But in here, you've chosen a different kind of battle. A fight against the self, waged in silence and prayer. Don't mistake this for a peaceful retreat. Your day kicks off at 2 a.m., not with a gentle sunrise, but with a cold, hard floor under your knees and a level of discipline that would break most people today. You've entered a world that moves to an ancient, silent rhythm. Welcome to 24 hours in a medieval monastery. The first sound to crack the dead quiet of the night is a bell. It isn't a gentle chime. It's a sharp, demanding clang that slices through the cold. It's 2 a.m. While the rest of the world sleeps, your day has already begun. You don't get up from a comfortable bed. You rise from a straw mattress on a wooden plank in the shared dormitory. There's no time to hesitate, no hitting the snooze button. You actually sleep in your rough woolen tunic, having only taken off your knife for safety. The cold is a constant enemy, seeping in through the stone walls. There's no fire for warmth, no comfort to be had except in the ritual that's about to start. You join your brothers, a silent line of shadows drifting through the dark halls of the cloister. The only light comes from a few flickering candles, which make your shadows dance against the stone arches. Your destination is the chapel, the heart of the monastery. It's just as cold as the dormitory, a huge, echoing space where you can see your own breath. This first prayer is called Matins, the night office. It's the longest and most serious of the 8 prayer times that will shape your entire day. You find your spot in the choir stalls, the polished wood smooth but unforgiving. And then, the chanting starts. For the next 2 hours, your voice joins a chorus of Latin psalms, a wave of sound that has followed this same rhythm for centuries. You might not understand every Latin word, especially if you couldn't read when you joined, but you feel the meaning. This is spiritual warfare. You're a soldier for God, and these hours before dawn are a battle against the darkness, a vigil you keep for the soul of the sleeping world. Your body is aching with exhaustion, your mind is foggy with sleep, but this is what you signed up for: to deny your body, to discipline your will, and to offer this sacrifice to God. Just as the first hint of gray light appears, Matins flows right into Lauds, the prayer of praise at dawn. The mood shifts. The chants become more hopeful, celebrating light's victory over darkness. a symbol of Christ's resurrection. You've made it through the night. After nearly 3 hours of continuous prayer, you're dismissed. You're allowed a short break, but any sleep you get is shallow and brief. You return to your straw bed, the chant still ringing in your ears. The sun isn't even up yet, but a huge chunk of your day's work is already done. This life is designed to strip away your ego and personal comfort, to remake you into an instrument of God. You aren't here to be happy. You're here to be holy. At 6 a.m., the bell rings again. This is for prime, the first hour of daylight and the official start of the day. After the prayers are sung, you don't head off to breakfast. Instead, the whole community files into the chapter house. This is one of the only times the abbot, the monastery's spiritual father, will speak to all the monks directly. The chapter house is where the community is built and disciplined. First, there's a reading from the Rule of Saint Benedict, the 6th century book that governs every single moment of your life. Its words are a constant reminder of your vows, poverty, chastity, and obedience. Then comes the toughest part of the morning. Monks are expected to publicly confess their failures from the day before. Maybe you got distracted during prayer, said a sharp word, or felt a moment of pride. The abbot listens and gives you your penance. The goal isn't to shame you, but to build humility and make sure no resentment builds up in the community. Finally, the abbot assigns the day's work. The Benedictine motto is ora et labora, pray and work. According to the rule, idleness is the enemy of the soul, so your day is a mix of both. Your job depends on your skills and what the monastery needs. You could be sent to the fields to plow, to the gardens to tend vegetables, or to the kitchens to help cook. If you can read and write, you might be assigned the most revered job of all, working in the scriptorium. Here, in total silence, you copy manuscripts. Before the printing press, this was the only way to preserve and share knowledge. Every stroke of your quill pen is an act of devotion, whether you're copying the Bible, the works of church fathers, or even classical texts from ancient Greece and Rome. You are a living bridge to the past, making sure civilization's fragile flame doesn't go out. Other monks might work in the infirmary, taking care of sick brothers or people from the local village, using their knowledge of herbal medicine. After the meeting, it's time for a simple breakfast in the refectory or dining hall. It might just be a hunk of bread and some watered-down ale or wine. All meals are eaten in total silence. One monk reads a holy text out loud, so you're feeding your soul while you feed your body. Conversation is forbidden. It's seen as a path to gossip and vanity. You even use a basic sign language for essential communication. As the first work period begins, the monastery is filled with a quiet hum of activity. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the scratch of a quill on parchment, the low murmur of private prayer. It all blends together. You own nothing, not even the clothes on your back. Your life isn't your own. It's a constant offering of work and prayer. Your morning's work is broken up by the bell. At 9 a.m., it rings for terce, the third hour. No matter what you're doing, you stop. If you're in the fields, you kneel right there on the ground. If you're in the scriptorium, you put down your quill. These short prayer services, along with sext at noon and none at 3 p.m., are like stitches holding the day together. They make sure your mind never wanders too far from God. At noon, the bell for sext signals the middle of the day and the end of morning work. This prayer is followed by the main meal, and it's the biggest one you'll get. You file into the dining hall, washing your hands at the stone basin in the cloister before entering. The rule of silence is absolute. The food is simple, reflecting your vow of poverty. A typical meal would be some dark bread, a thick stew of vegetables like beans and lentils, and maybe fish if there's a river or pond nearby. You get a ration of wine or ale, which was often safer to drink than water. Meat from four-legged animals is completely forbidden unless you're very sick. This diet isn't about being healthy in the modern sense. It's about discipline. Denying the body rich foods was a way to train the will. Even eating is a spiritual exercise. While you eat, a designated reader stands at a podium, reading from the lives of the saints or from scripture. You listen as you chew, the story of a martyr's sacrifice offering a sharp contrast to your humble bowl of pottage. The only sounds are the reader's voice and the scrape of spoons in wooden bowls. On fasting days, like Wednesdays and Fridays, you might skip this meal entirely, especially during Lent. Only the monks doing the hardest physical labor, like harvesting crops, would be excused. Hunger was just another tool for spiritual growth, an emptiness in the body meant to create more room for God. After the meal, there's a short rest period. Some of the older monks who have been up since 2 a.m. might take a quick nap. Others might practice Lectio Divina, a slow meditative reading of scripture. Or maybe you just find a quiet spot in the garden to walk and think. This small break is precious before the bell rings again and the afternoon's work begins. The brief, quiet rest after the meal is shattered by the bell calling you back to work. The sun is high and a sense of duty settles back over the monastery. You return to your assigned task, back to the fields, the scriptorium, the workshop, or the infirmary. The day is long and the rule of Saint Benedict is clear. Every hour must be used well. At 3 p.m., the bell rings for none, the 9th hour. This prayer is especially important because it marks the hour that Christ died on the cross. The chants are serious and reflective, a moment to pause your work and think about the ultimate sacrifice. It's a powerful spiritual anchor in the middle of a long afternoon of hard work. By now, the exhaustion is a constant ache in your back and shoulders, but this is part of the discipline. This physical struggle is meant to mirror the spiritual struggle against sin. And the work continues. If you're in the fields, you might be bringing in the harvest that the monastery depends on to survive. These communities were built to be completely self-sufficient. The grain you harvest becomes the bread you eat. The grapes you pick become wine for the mass. If you're a craftsman, like a carpenter or stonemason, you're keeping the abbey itself from falling apart, maybe fixing a leaky roof or carving a new stone for the cloister. For the monks in the scriptorium, the afternoon light is precious. You work as long as the sun allows, carefully forming each letter. A single book could take months or even years to complete. It's painful, eye-straining work, often done in a cold room where fires are forbidden because they're a risk to the priceless manuscripts. Your fingers are cramped and your back is stiff, but you know how important this work is. You're not just a copyist. In an age when most people can't read, you are a guardian of civilization. As the afternoon wears on, the pace is steady. There's no rush, just the consistent rhythm of the job. The monastery works like one body, with each monk doing his part for the good of the whole. This shared effort, done mostly in silence, creates a powerful bond. As the sun begins to sink, you know the day's labor is almost over. Soon, the bell for Vespers will ring, and you'll shift from the work of your hands back to the work of the Spirit. As the sun goes down, around 6 p.m., the bell for Vespers rings. This is the evening prayer, one of the most important of the day. You gather again in the chapel, which is now dim and smells of beeswax candles. The fading light through the high windows creates a feeling of deep peace. The chants for Vespers are usually psalms of thanks for the day that's passed and prayers for protection through the night. After Vespers, there's a light supper called the collation. It's even smaller than the midday meal, maybe some leftover bread, a piece of fruit, and water. This is followed by a group reading in the chapter house, where the abbot might offer some final spiritual guidance for the day. Around 8 or 9 p.m., the final bell of the day tolls for Compline. This is the last prayer service, a short and quiet ritual to close the day. The name comes from a Latin word meaning completion. The prayers ask for a peaceful night and protection from the dangers of the dark, both real and spiritual. Right after Compline, the Great Silence begins. This is the strictest silence of the day, and it lasts all night until the next morning's chapter meeting. No one speaks a single word unless it's a dire emergency. This isn't just about being quiet, it's a spiritual discipline. It's meant to calm the mind, allowing you to reflect on your day and be more aware of God's presence. It also has a practical purpose. It makes sure everyone can rest without being disturbed. After the abbot sprinkles you with holy water, you file out of the chapel and head to the dormitory in total quiet. The day that began in darkness more than 18 hours ago now ends in darkness. You lie down on your simple bed, still fully clothed, for just a few hours of sleep before that bell rings again at 2 a.m., starting the whole cycle over. The rhythm is relentless. The discipline is absolute. It is a life boiled down to the two things that have defined every single moment of your day: to pray and to work. This 24-hour cycle was the engine of medieval monastic life. It was a tough, repetitive, and unforgiving routine, a far cry from any romantic idea of a peaceful escape. The lack of sleep, the plain food, the hard labor, and the constant discipline were all designed for one purpose: to break an individual's will and rebuild it in the image of Christ. This wasn't an escape from the world. It was a head-on collision with the self, a spiritual war fought every hour of every day. Monks weren't looking for comfort inside these stone walls. They were looking for salvation. And in doing so, they believed they were performing a vital service for a chaotic world, praying for its soul, and in the quiet of the scriptorium, preserving the very foundations of Western thought for generations they would never meet. If you found this journey into the medieval monastery fascinating, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. Thank you for watching. What if 99% of everything ever written in the ancient world was just gone? Not just stories, but the secrets of science, philosophy, and entire empires vanished. We like to think of history as a straight line, a story passed down from one generation to the next. But the truth is, it's more like a shattered mirror. Huge libraries, holding hundreds of thousands of scrolls, have disappeared, leaving massive holes in our understanding of the past. The wisdom of entire civilizations just turned to dust. So, we're going on a journey back to a time when libraries weren't just buildings. They were the beating intellectual hearts of civilization. From the sun-drenched halls of Alexandria to a Roman villa buried by a volcano, this is a rescue mission for a legacy that was stolen from us. Because in the ashes of these forgotten libraries, a few embers are still glowing. And today, we're finally learning how to read them. This is the story of the greatest intellectual disaster in human history, and the modern-day quest to reverse it. In the heart of the ancient world, on the coast of Egypt, stood a beacon of human genius, the city of Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great, it was home to a place that has haunted the dreams of scholars for centuries, the Great Library of Alexandria. This wasn't just a place to store books. It was the world's first real university, a research center called the Museion, or Shrine of the Muses. It was, without a doubt, the intellectual crown jewel of antiquity. Imagine walking its halls in the 3rd century BC. You'd be surrounded by shelves sagging under the weight of an estimated 500,000 papyrus scrolls. This was the sum of all human knowledge gathered with an almost obsessive passion by the kings who ruled Egypt. Their policy was aggressive. Agents were sent across the world to buy every scroll they could find on any subject by any author. If a ship docked in Alexandria's port, it was searched. Any books found on board were taken, The originals were kept for the library, and a fresh copy was handed back to the surprised owner. Within these walls, the greatest minds of the age came to study. It was here that Euclid laid out the rules of geometry we still learn in school today. The brilliant inventor Archimedes is said to have studied here, and a head librarian named Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the entire planet with stunning accuracy using nothing but shadows, a well, and his own mind. The library held the works of Homer, the plays of Sophocles, and revolutionary texts on medicine, astronomy, and history. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of thought. But this golden age wasn't meant to last. The story of the library's end is almost as famous as its life, but it's tangled in myths. For centuries, the blame has fallen on one man, Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, while he was under siege in the city, his soldiers set fire to enemy ships in the harbor. According to some ancient writers, the fire spread to the docks and destroyed warehouses where books were being stored. The Roman historian Livy claimed 40,000 scrolls went up in smoke. That single, dramatic fire became the symbol for the library's destruction. A world of learning suddenly plunged into darkness. But the real story is probably more complicated and, in some ways, even more tragic. Many historians now believe the library didn't die in one fiery catastrophe, but from a long, slow illness. The decline started long before Caesar, with political purges that forced scholars to flee the city. Funding dried up. The institution just withered away. Fires and riots in the centuries that followed likely destroyed what was left. There wasn't one big explosion. It was a slow-motion collapse that saw the intellectual heart of the world simply fade away. The loss is staggering. Some scholars estimate that less than 10% of all ancient Greek literature has survived. For Latin literature, that number might be as low as 1%. We have no idea what scientific discoveries, what philosophical ideas, what epic poems were lost for good. The end of the Library of Alexandria wasn't just the loss of a building, it was the erasure of our own memory. While Alexandria is the most famous lost library, it wasn't the only one. In fact, its whole purpose was inspired by an earlier idea. Back in 4th century BC Athens, the philosopher Aristotle, Plato's student and tutor to Alexander the Great, did something revolutionary. He started collecting books. He built the first great private library in Europe at his school, the Lyceum. It was huge, reflecting his bottomless curiosity, and it even included the original manuscripts of his own 400 books. But after he died, his precious collection went on a dangerous journey. Fearing it would be seized by rival kings, Aristotle's followers hid the scrolls in a damp cellar. For over a century, they were left to rot, damaged by moisture and insects. Eventually, parts of this foundational library were sold off, and many scholars think they ended up forming a core piece of the collection at Alexandria. It's a harsh reminder that even before the Great Fires, knowledge was fragile, always one step away from being lost. Centuries later, as Alexandria's flame began to flicker out, another great library rose to take its place. In the new capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople, a massive effort began in the 4th century AD to save the wisdom of the past. The Imperial Library of Constantinople had a critical mission: transfer the knowledge from decaying papyrus scrolls onto a new, tougher material, parchment. At its peak, it was said to hold over 100,000 volumes, acting as a vital bridge between the ancient world and the Middle Ages. This library wasn't just a vault. Scribes were constantly at work, painstakingly copying the great works of Greek and Roman thought. But just like its predecessor, the Imperial Library wasn't safe from disaster. It was hit by several fires over its 1,000-year history. One fire in 473 AD reportedly destroyed a shocking 120,000 volumes. But the final, fatal blow came in 1204, when Knights of the Fourth Crusade sacked the city. What they didn't burn, they sold off or scattered. The library that had served as the last guardian of classical knowledge was essentially gone. The Ottoman conquest of the city in 1453 sealed its fate for good. The destruction of these great libraries shows a painful pattern. With every fire, every war, another piece of our shared history vanished. But while fire was often the villain of this story, a different kind of catastrophe would, in a bizarre twist, lead to the most miraculous preservation of all. While fire destroyed so much, it was fire and ash that miraculously saved one ancient library. Our story now takes us to the Bay of Naples, under the shadow of the sleeping giant, Mount Vesuvius. In the 1st century AD, the Roman city of Herculaneum was a ritzy seaside town filled with luxurious villas. One of the grandest is now called the Villa of the Papyri. It might have belonged to Julius Caesar's own father-in-law, and inside, it held a private library. In 79 AD, Vesuvius erupted with terrifying force, burying Herculaneum and its more famous neighbor, Pompeii, under a thick blanket of volcanic ash and rock. The superheated wave that blasted through the city instantly carbonized everything organic. Wood, food, and people were turned into charcoal. And so were the scrolls in the villa's library. For almost 1,700 years, that library lay buried and forgotten. Then, in the 1750s, workers digging a well accidentally hit the villa. As they tunneled through the hardened volcanic rock, they found what looked like burnt logs or chunks of coal. It took them a while to realize what they'd actually found. Over 1,800 papyrus scrolls, flash-cooked by the volcano. It was the only intact library to survive from the entire classical world. It was a discovery that should have changed everything. But there was one agonizing problem. The scrolls were so fragile that any attempt to unroll them made them crumble into dust. Early attempts were a disaster. Scholars tried everything, mercury, vegetable gas, to try and soften them, but the result was almost always the same. The priceless texts were destroyed in the very act of trying to read them. All of that knowledge was locked away, so close you could touch it, but completely out of reach. For more than 2 centuries, the Herculaneum scrolls remained silent, their secrets trapped inside their charred little tombs. We had found a library, but we couldn't read it. For generations, those charred scrolls were one of archaeology's biggest frustrations. The only surviving library from antiquity was right there, but its words were locked away. That all started to change in the 21st century, thanks to the vision of one man, Dr. Brent Seals, a computer scientist at the University of Kentucky. He asked a simple but brilliant question. If we can use technology to see inside a human body without cutting it open, why can't we use it to see inside a scroll? That question launched a quest that would last 2 decades. To read the unreadable. The challenge was huge. The ink used on the scrolls was made of charcoal and water. To an X-ray, that ink has almost the same density as the carbonized papyrus it's written on, making it practically invisible. It was like trying to read pencil on black paper in a pitch-black room. The first step was a process Dr. Seals called virtual unwrapping. Using powerful CT scanners, his team created incredibly detailed 3D digital models of the rolled-up scrolls. This let them map every single fiber and overlapping layer without ever having to touch the real thing. But seeing the layers wasn't enough. They still couldn't see the ink. The breakthrough required something even more powerful. The team took the scrolls to particle accelerators, like the Diamond Light Source in the UK, which produced rays 10 billion times brighter than the sun. This intense light let them spot tiny differences in the papyrus, But the ink was still a ghost. The final piece of the puzzle wouldn't come from physics. It would come from artificial intelligence. In March 2023, Dr. Seals, with tech entrepreneurs Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross, launched the Vesuvius Challenge. They released the 3D scans of the scrolls to the public and offered a $1 million prize to anyone who could build an AI model to read the hidden text. The challenge lit a fire under a global community of coders and students. They trained machine learning algorithms on tiny open fragments of the scrolls where the ink was still visible, teaching the AI to recognize the unique texture the ancient ink left on the papyrus fibers. The progress was incredible. In late 2023, a 21-year-old American computer science student named Luke Ferrator did what no one had been able to do for 2,000 years. His AI model spotted the ghostly shapes of letters inside one of the unopened scrolls. The very first word to appear out of the darkness was porphyres, the ancient Greek word for purple. History had been made. This incredible breakthrough is just the beginning of rewriting our understanding of the ancient world. But which of these lost libraries do you wish we could get back? The collected knowledge of Alexandria, the personal writings of Aristotle, or the forgotten histories of Constantinople? Let us know in the comments. Ferrator's discovery opened the floodgates. He teamed up with Youssef Nader, an Egyptian PhD student in Germany, and Julian Schilliger, a Swiss robotics student. By combining their work, they pushed their AI models deeper into the scroll. In February 2024, the Vesuvius Challenge announced that the team had won the $700,000 grand prize. They had successfully read over 2,000 characters, multiple columns of continuous text from a scroll that had been sealed shut since the year 79 AD. For the first time, we could read the thoughts of someone from the ancient world, speaking to us directly across 2 millennia. The text they uncovered is a philosophical work, likely by an Epicurean philosopher named Philodemus, who wrote many of the books in the villa's library. In it, the author discusses the nature of pleasure and asks if things that are scarce are actually more enjoyable than things that are abundant. As in the case of food, one passage reads, "We do not right away believe things that are scarce to be absolutely more pleasant than those which are abundant." This might not be a lost play by Sophocles or a secret history of the Roman Empire, but its importance is off the charts. We are reading a never-before-seen text from antiquity. We have a direct window into the philosophical debates that were happening right before one of history's most famous disasters. The team had only read about 5% of just one scroll. There are hundreds more waiting. And archaeologists believe the main library of the villa, which could contain thousands more Latin and Greek texts, hasn't even been excavated yet. The potential is breathtaking. We might still find lost works by Aristotle, Sappho, or even Homer. As one historian said, this could transform our knowledge of the ancient world on a scale not seen since the Renaissance. Our story started with the smoke of Alexandria, a symbol of everything we've lost. It took us through the quiet decay of other great collections, a sad reminder of how fragile knowledge really is. For centuries, the story of forgotten libraries was about a past that was slipping further and further away. But the story didn't end there. In the carbonized ruins of Herculaneum, what was once a symbol of destruction has become a symbol of hope. The ghostly letters emerging from those blackened scrolls are more than just ancient words. They're a declaration that what was lost can be found. They prove that the embers of our forgotten history can be fanned back into a flame. The digital unwrapping of these scrolls is a turning point, a new kind of renaissance where technology is letting us reach back in time and take back our stolen legacy. These scrolls are just one library out of countless that disappeared. What other secrets are still buried out there, waiting for a key? What forgotten wisdom is ready to be reawakened? the quest to read our own past has only just begun. What if the year isn't 2025? What if right now it's actually sometime in the 1700s? It sounds like the plot of a movie, but there's a theory that claims 297 years of our history were completely fabricated, all to put a Holy Roman Emperor at the dawn of a new millennium. This is the core story of the phantom time hypothesis, a conspiracy theory so wild it claims one of history's most famous figures, Charlemagne, never even existed. For decades, this idea has captured the imagination of people who love a good mystery. It suggests a conspiracy on a scale that's almost impossible to wrap your head around, involving emperors and popes rewriting the very fabric of time. Today, we're going to pull on that thread. We'll build the case for this incredible theory, exploring the so-called evidence its supporters present, and then we'll put that evidence to the test to see if nearly 3 centuries of the Dark Ages really do vanish under scrutiny. So, get comfortable, because we're about to question a big chunk of what you think you know about the past. To understand the phantom time hypothesis, we have to go back to the 1990s, to a German historian and publisher named Heribert Illig. Illig put forward a shocking claim. The years between 614 and 911 AD simply didn't happen. That's 297 years of history, just gone. According to Illig, this wasn't a mistake or a miscalculation. It was a deliberate, massive fraud, a conspiracy. But who would do such a thing and why? Illig points the finger at 3 powerful men: the Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, Pope Sylvester II, and possibly the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. The alleged motive? Pure ambition and symbolic power. Otto III wanted his reign to coincide with the year 1000 AD, a hugely significant milestone just 1 millennium after the birth of Christ. Being the emperor at the dawn of this new Christian era would, in theory, cement his place in history and frame his rule as divinely ordained. To pull this off, Illig claims they orchestrated a breathtakingly complex plot. They didn't just move the calendar forward, they had to invent a history to fill the nearly 300-year gap. This meant commissioning an army of scribes and monks to forge documents, invent historical events, and even create entirely fictional rulers to populate these phantom centuries. Think about what that would mean. If Illig is right, some of the most foundational events of the early Middle Ages are nothing but stories. The great Emperor Charlemagne, the father of Europe, crowned in the year 800? A fabrication. A character invented to give this phantom era a hero. The Carolingian Renaissance, a period of supposed cultural revival, an illusion. The Viking raids that terrorized England, the early Islamic expansion into Spain, all of it, according to the hypothesis, would be part of this grand deception. Essentially, the theory argues that we are living a lie, that when our calendar turned to 2025, it should have been celebrating the arrival of 1728. It's an idea that challenges the very foundation of our historical records. To make his case, Illig and his supporters point to what they see as gaping holes and bizarre inconsistencies in the official story of our past. They believe they've found the clues that unravel the entire thing. Every great conspiracy theory needs evidence, and proponents of the phantom time hypothesis believe they have some compelling exhibits. They argue that if you look closely, the official historical record starts to fall apart, revealing the seams of a massive cover-up. Let's build their case and examine the 3 main pillars of their argument. The first and most crucial piece of evidence, according to Heribert Illig, is a glaring mathematical error in our calendar. This revolves around the switch from the Julian to the Gregorian calendar. The Julian calendar reform began in 45 BC and was a pretty good system, but it had one small flaw. It counted the year as being exactly 365.25 days long by adding a leap day every 4 years. The problem is, the true solar year is about 11 minutes shorter. Now, 11 minutes doesn't sound like much, but over centuries, it adds up. By the 1500s, the calendar had drifted so far that the seasons were out of sync. So, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a new, more accurate calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which we still use. To get everything back on track, the Pope declared that 10 days would be skipped. Thursday, October 4th, 1582, was immediately followed by Friday, October 15th. And this is where Illig says, "Aha, gotcha." He did the math. The Julian calendar had been in use for over 1600 years. An error of 11 minutes per year over that entire time should have resulted in a drift of about 13 days, not 10. So where did the other 3 days of error go? Illig's answer is simple. Those 3 days correspond to roughly 300 years that never actually happened. In his view, the 10-day correction is the smoking gun, a mathematical ghost that proves the existence of a phantom time period. The second pillar of the theory is what supporters call a suspicious silence in the historical and archaeological record. They argue that the period from 614 to 911 AD is suspiciously barren. This era is part of what we call the Dark Ages, and for proponents of the theory, it's a little too dark. They claim there's a scarcity of original written documents from this time. While later copies of texts exist, they argue that the lack of originals is a red flag. It's as if the forgers created a bunch of copies to back up their fictional history, but couldn't fake the authentic age of original manuscripts. This claimed scarcity extends to archaeology. Proponents ask, where are the artifacts? They argue that finding well-dated archaeological evidence from this specific 297-year window is unusually difficult. They question the reliability of dating methods for this specific era, suggesting the data has been misinterpreted or just isn't there. To them, this isn't just a gap in our knowledge. It's evidence of a void in time itself. It's as if a whole segment of history was written, but never lived. The final pillar of their case is the very existence of figures like Charlemagne. The theory suggests Charlemagne is almost too perfect, a legendary figure who seems created to be the centerpiece of this fabricated era. Crowned in the year 800, right in the middle of the supposed phantom time, he's portrayed as a brilliant military leader, a reformer, and a patron of learning who single-handedly pulled Europe out of darkness. Proponents find this narrative suspicious. They argue that the story of Charlemagne feels like a beautifully crafted piece of historical fiction, designed to fill the void with a grand narrative that would make the whole lie seem plausible. So, the case is made. A calendar discrepancy, a suspicious lack of evidence, and the invention of a legendary hero. It's an intriguing accusation, but now it's time to bring in the counter evidence and see if this case for phantom time holds up. Now we move to the rebuttal, where we bring in the mainstream historians and scientists. And this is where the case for the phantom time hypothesis begins to crumble piece by piece. Let's start with that smoking gun, the calendar correction. The claim that a 13-day error was expected, but only 10 days were corrected, sounds damning, but it's based on a false premise. Heribert Illig calculated the drift all the way from the calendar's creation. However, Pope Gregory XIII's astronomers weren't trying to reset the calendar to the time of Julius Caesar. Their goal was religious. They wanted to realign the calendar with the date of the First Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Why 325 AD? Because that was when the early church standardized the formula for calculating Easter, tying it to the spring equinox. The whole point of the 1582 reform was to bring Easter back in line with the seasons as they were at that council. When you calculate the accumulated error between 325 AD and 1582, the drift comes out to, you guessed it, approximately 10 days. There are no 3 missing days of error. The math works perfectly once you use the correct starting point. The central pillar of the entire hypothesis simply evaporates. Next, let's tackle the alleged lack of evidence from 614 to 911 AD. The idea that this is a silent age is a dramatic overstatement and a very Eurocentric view of the world. While Europe was more fragmented at the time, to say nothing was happening is to ignore a world of evidence. The most powerful scientific rebuttal comes from 2 fields completely independent of historical documents: astronomy and dendrochronology. First, astronomy. Cultures all over the world have recorded major celestial events like solar eclipses. These events are cosmic clocks. We can use physics to calculate the exact date and time an eclipse was visible from a specific place. If 297 years were inserted into the timeline, these calculations would be completely off. An eclipse recorded by the Romans in 59 AD wouldn't line up, but they do, perfectly. More importantly, we have records from within the supposed phantom time. Chinese historians during the Tang Dynasty meticulously recorded solar eclipses. When we check their records against modern calculations, they match the conventional timeline, not one with a 300-year hole in it. Halley's Comet was recorded by astronomers around the globe in 837 AD, right in the middle of the Phantom period. These observations from different cultures all confirm the same timeline. Then there's dendrochronology, or tree ring dating. Scientists have built continuous, year-by-year timelines stretching back thousands of years by overlapping tree ring patterns. These chronologies for regions like Germany and Ireland are complete and continuous through the so-called phantom period. They show no gap, no anomaly, no 297 missing years, just a steady, unbroken sequence of seasons. And this brings us to perhaps the biggest flaw in the hypothesis. It's incredibly Eurocentric. For it to work, it would have to be a global conspiracy of impossible scale. During the period Illig claims was fabricated, the Tang dynasty in China was experiencing a golden age. The Islamic world was flourishing, expanding across North Africa and into Spain, and producing revolutionary breakthroughs in science and medicine. We have continuous histories and coinages from the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic caliphates that span the entire period. Are we to believe that the Caliph of Baghdad and the Emperor of China were in on Otto III's plot? The idea is absurd. Finally, what about Charlemagne? Was he just a fictional hero? The evidence says no. We have his biography, written by a contemporary scholar in his court named Einhard. We have coins minted with his image. We have his palace chapel at Aachen that you can still visit today. We even have what are believed to be his bones, which have been studied. Denying his existence in the face of this physical and documentary evidence is a massive stretch. The scarcity of evidence isn't a sign of a void in time. It's a misunderstanding of the historical period. The evidence is there, from the stars in the sky, to the rings in a tree, to the rich histories of civilizations across the globe. So, what's the verdict on the phantom time hypothesis? After laying out the case and the counter-evidence, the conclusion is clear. The theory is an intriguing thought experiment, but it's demonstrably false. It's built on a foundation of misinterpretation. Its central piece of evidence, the calendar correction, is based on a simple mathematical misunderstanding. Its other claims are refuted by a mountain of data from multiple, independent fields. The silent, unbiased testimony of the stars proves it wrong. Ancient astronomical records from different continents all align with our current timeline. The silent, unbiased testimony of the trees proves it wrong. Tree rings provide an unbroken, year-by-year record that flows right through the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries without a single gap. And the loud vocal testimony of the rest of the world proves it wrong. The flourishing civilizations of the Islamic Golden Age and China's Tang Dynasty left behind a rich historical record that seamlessly stitches our timeline together. The phantom time hypothesis is a classic example of how a conspiracy theory works. It takes a small, confusing detail and weaves a grand, dramatic story around it that falls apart under real scrutiny. History isn't a perfect monolithic text. It's a complex, messy, and wonderful puzzle that scholars work to piece together. While it's fun to ask, what if? The evidence confirms that the 297 years between 614 and 911 AD did happen. Charlemagne was real. The Vikings did sail. And the year is, in fact, 2025. Time, it turns out, is a lot harder to rewrite than a history book. The phantom time hypothesis is a wild ride, but it's far from the only strange theory out there. The past is filled with genuine puzzles, from lost civilizations to undeciphered scripts. It's a reminder to always question things, but also to follow the evidence wherever it leads. What other historical mysteries or conspiracy theories do you find fascinating? I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And if you enjoyed untangling this knot in time, make sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the core stories of our world. Thanks for watching.